어둠 속에 갇혔고 난 어디로 가야 할지 몰라 점점 더 깊어져가는 불안함에 난 무너져.
Hi everyone, my name's Shane, and in this video let's get started into the world of film photography. I'll introduce you to a few styles of film cameras and we'll talk about some of the basics, especially around exposure and how to get correct exposed images on your film camera. Let's go. So let's start by having a look at a few different types of film cameras. So here we have a point and shoot camera. Now generally with a point and shoot camera, a lot of the features of the camera are automated. So you may not have as much manual control over the camera, but the beauty of a point and shoot camera is generally how small and light they are. Very compact and easy to carry around, and that is a great way to start into film photography. The camera in the middle is an SLR camera, so SLR standing for single lens reflex. These cameras were very popular in the 60s and 70s, and they actually have a mirror inside the camera so you can actually see through the lens by reflection in the mirror. Now generally these SLR cameras are a great way to get into film photography because they have a lot more manual control. Similarly with this camera, which is a rangefinder camera, with these they're very manual. They may not have really any automated features, very mechanical, which again can be very appealing and a great way to start getting into film photography and learning the basics. So when you're getting started into photography, whether it's film photography or digital photography, there are three key components that I think are really critical to understand. And if you master those, you'll be well on the way to understanding about 90% of how to use your camera. And the three things are ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. So ISO is your film's sensitivity to light. There's a rating scale, but essentially the key thing to remember is that the lower the ISO rating on the film, the more light the film needs to make a correct exposure. So if the ISO is rated at 100 or 200, that's probably going to be more ideal to use in daylight situations, and it needs more light to get that correct exposure. Whereas if you have an ISO rated film of 800 or 1600, that you can use a bit easier at night because there's less light that's required to hit the film to make a correct exposure. Now on the camera, using this Canon SLR as an example, you can set the ISO on this one by a little lever here, and on most cameras there'll be a function to set the ISO if the camera has an inbuilt light meter. Now on some cameras, the camera may actually even read the code that's on the film canister and automatically set the ISO. So that does happen a fair bit in point and shoot type cameras, where the camera will automatically set the ISO reading it from the actual film. The second key thing you want to understand is aperture. So on this camera here, we've got the lens, and on the lens there's all these numbers. Now essentially these numbers relating to the aperture are how much light the lens is able to gather. So again, similar with the ISO, there's a kind of number scale with aperture, and the lower the number means that the lens has actually more light gathering power. So a lens that has a 1.4 aperture, which on this lens it actually does have, that can enable quite a lot of light gathering. But where a lens might have a lower value of say f2.8 or f4, that means it's not going to have as much light gathering power as this lens, which is a 1.4 lens. So understanding how much light gathering power your lens has is important, and that's also for creative effects, because one of the common ways to create beautiful portraits and get those beautiful backgrounds where they blur away is to have a lens that has what we call a faster aperture, which might be something like this, 1.4 or f2. So the lower the number, the more light gathering power your lens has. And the third key component you want to have an understanding of is shutter speed. So on here, on most cameras, you'll have a shutter speed dial, and this is where there'll be various speeds, again, various numbers. And the way you read this is that the bigger the number, the faster the shutter speed, which essentially means that the shutter when taking a photo is open for a less amount of time. So if the shutter speed is at, say, 1000 on this camera, which is its fastest, it essentially means, well, that's where the camera can take an image and leave the shutter open for the less amount of time. Whereas when you go down to what we call slower shutter speeds, say 1/15 of a second or 1/30 of a second, that means that the shutter is going to be open for more time, which is going to allow more light to go onto our negative, our film in the camera, which sometimes you need to make a correct exposure. The downside can be, though, the slower the shutter speed, it can allow movement into the image, because if you're hand holding that camera while you're taking that image with the slow shutter speed, there might be some hand movement while the shutter is open for that period of time. Whereas if you're using a faster shutter speed, like 1/1000th of a second, generally that's going to be able to freeze the action. So that's great for street photography or where there's movement, but you want to have your image crystal clear. Using a faster shutter speed is generally going to be able to freeze that subject so you capture everything in clearer detail. But definitely shutter speed is critical in understanding how much light is going to hit our negative. So ISO, aperture and shutter speed work together to create a correct exposure and are commonly referred to as the exposure triangle. And if you understand each of those three key components, basically that's 90% of the fundamentals of photography and exposure. Just a quick story. I was really grateful when I started getting into photography and I was keen to learn. I didn't know much at all, and I was about to purchase a digital camera, and I thought, great, I'm going to buy a digital camera. I'm going to learn all about photography. It'd be fantastic. But when I went and tried the digital camera in the shop, I was just so overwhelmed. There were just so many features in the camera. I didn't understand it. It felt very foreign to me. But in the same store, they had some used items, and there was a used camera there that was very basic in its functions, and essentially all you could alter really your shutter speed and your aperture, which would be on the lens. And that was really amazing for me because it kind of made sense. So I purchased that camera and used it for a while, and it really taught me the basics, and I'm so grateful it did, because from there I was then able to understand a bit more about cameras in general. And the camera I purchased was a bit similar to this rangefinder here. It was a digital version essentially of this Leica film rangefinder. And then once I used that for a while, then I started looking into film and eventually purchased a Leica film camera, which again has everything stripped back to the basics. Really on these, all you can control are your shutter speed and your aperture. And again, the ISO is going to be rated essentially what's on the film. And I think to me, that was just such a great way to start getting into photography, because I could understand those three core elements, ISO, aperture and shutter speed, and then use it in combination to understand exposure. So I think once you master those basics, you can really master any camera from there, and you'll go on and make amazing photos. And yeah, I'd love to see what you create. Thanks everyone for watching, and I hope that some of those tips will be useful as you venture into the world of film photography. Enjoy the journey. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you'd like to see more of these style of videos. Enjoy your day and happy shooting.
이 긴 밤에 별은 희미한 빛을 반짝인가, 마음속에 의문이 하나 끊임없이 울려 퍼진다. 넌 날 사랑하니, 이 간단한 세 글자 마음속에 표현하지 못한다. 봄, 여름, 가을, 겨울 지나 세상의 번함을 보았지만 너의 생각